Question 1. The control framework reveals that a manufacturer is preparing to place a novel Class EIB implantable device on the EU market. Given the device's unique mechanism of action and limited existing clinical data, which of the following represents the most robust and compliant approach to fulfilling the clinical evaluation requirements under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745? Option A. Rely primarily on a thorough literature review of existing clinical studies on devices with similar intended uses, assuming that the novel mechanism of action will yield comparable clinical outcomes. Option B. Focus on generating extensive preclinical data and obtaining detailed expert opinions from clinicians regarding the anticipated clinical performance and safety of the device. Option C. Defer the primary establishment of the device's safety and performance to the post-market surveillance phase, gathering data after the device has been made available to the market. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive clinical investigation specifically designed for this novel device, and supplement this with a critical appraisal of all relevant scientific literature and any available data from equivalent devices, ensuring the overall evidence adequately supports the device's safety and performance claims. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive clinical investigation specifically designed for this novel device, and supplement this with a critical appraisal of all relevant scientific literature and any available data from equivalent devices, ensuring the overall evidence adequately supports the device's safety and performance claims. Explanation. The control framework reveals that a manufacturer is preparing to launch a novel Class EIB implantable device. A significant challenge arises in demonstrating the safety and performance of this device through clinical evaluation, especially given its novelty and the limited availability of directly comparable pre-existing data. The professional challenge lies in determining the appropriate scope and depth of the clinical evaluation to satisfy the requirements of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745, particularly Article 61 and Annex Roman 14. This requires a nuanced understanding of what constitutes sufficient clinical evidence for a device with a novel mechanism of action, balancing the need for robust data with the practicalities of clinical investigation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the MDR's emphasis on a continuous, proactive process of clinical evaluation. It prioritizes generating new clinical data through a well-designed clinical investigation, supplemented by a thorough analysis of all available scientific literature and data from equivalent devices, if applicable and justified. This systematic approach ensures that the clinical evaluation report, CER, is based on the most relevant and robust evidence, directly supporting the device's intended purpose and demonstrating its conformity with the general safety and performance requirements. This aligns with the MDR's objective of ensuring a high level of health protection for patients and users. An incorrect approach that relies solely on a literature review of similar, but not equivalent, devices would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to adequately address the specific risks and performance characteristics of the novel device, potentially leading to an incomplete or misleading CER. Ethically, it could expose patients to unforeseen risks. From a regulatory standpoint, it would likely be deemed insufficient by notified bodies, leading to delays or rejection of the CE marking application. Another incorrect approach that focuses only on preclinical data and expert opinions, without any direct clinical investigation, would also be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. While preclinical data is important, it cannot fully substitute for real-world clinical performance and safety data. Relying solely on expert opinions, without objective clinical evidence, lacks the rigor required by the MDR and could result in a flawed assessment of the device's clinical benefit-risk profile. Finally, an approach that delays the clinical evaluation until post-market surveillance, PMS, is well underway would be a critical regulatory failure. The MDR mandates that clinical evaluation is an ongoing process that begins before the device is placed on the market and continues throughout its life cycle. Relying on PMS alone to establish initial safety and performance would mean the device is already on the market without adequate pre-market clinical evidence, violating the MDR's principles and potentially endangering patients. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the device's novelty, intended use, and potential risks. This should be followed by a systematic assessment of existing data, literature, PMS of similar devices if applicable and justified, and a determination of any residual uncertainties. Based on this assessment, a plan for generating necessary new clinical data, typically through a clinical investigation, should be developed and executed. The CER should then be compiled, integrating all evidence and critically appraising its sufficiency to demonstrate conformity with the MDR's requirements. This iterative and evidence-based process is crucial for successful regulatory compliance and patient safety. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new medical device, designed for minimally invasive cardiac procedures, incorporates advanced AI-driven image analysis for real-time guidance. While similar devices without AI are classified as Class IA, the manufacturer is considering the implications of the AI component on its classification under the MDR 2017/745. Which of the following approaches best reflects the regulatory requirement for reclassification procedures in this scenario? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745, specifically evaluating how the AI-driven image analysis and its intended purpose, in conjunction with the device's other functionalities, impact the risk classification, potentially leading to a higher class. Option B. Rely on the opinion of a marketing consultant who suggests that given the competitive landscape, a Class IA classification would be most advantageous for market entry, and proceed with that classification. Option C. Assume the AI component is a software as a medical device, SAMD, and classify it separately, then combine the classifications of the hardware and SAMD to determine the overall device class. Option D. Classify the device based on the classification of similar devices without AI, assuming the AI component does not fundamentally alter the device's risk profile, and proceed with the Class IA conformity assessment. The correct answer is D. Classify the device based on the classification of similar devices without AI, assuming the AI component does not fundamentally alter the device's risk profile, and proceed with the Class IA conformity assessment. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs, determining the correct classification for a novel device that straddles existing classifications or has features that could influence its risk profile. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting the MDR 2017/745, specifically Annex Roman 8, to assign the appropriate risk class, which has significant implications for conformity assessment procedures, required documentation, and ultimately, market access. Misclassification can lead to non-compliance, delays, and potential patient harm. The correct approach involves a meticulous, systematic review of the device's intended purpose, its mechanism of action, and its potential risks, directly referencing the classification rules in Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745. This approach ensures that the classification is based on the regulatory text and the device's inherent characteristics, leading to the correct conformity assessment pathway and demonstrating due diligence. It aligns with the ethical imperative to ensure device safety and effectiveness by subjecting devices to the appropriate level of scrutiny. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the classification of a similar, previously marketed device, without a thorough reevaluation under the MDR 2017/745. This fails to acknowledge that the MDR introduced new classification rules and potentially altered the risk assessment for certain device types. It also risks overlooking novel aspects of the new device that might warrant a higher risk class. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed to market or cost reduction over regulatory accuracy by selecting the lowest possible risk class without sufficient justification. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the MDR's primary objective of patient safety and could lead to significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. A further incorrect approach would be to seek external advice without providing comprehensive device information, leading to potentially misleading guidance. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the device's intended use and all its functionalities. This should be followed by a detailed mapping of these characteristics against each relevant classification rule in Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745. If ambiguity persists, seeking clarification from the notified body or national competent authorities, supported by a comprehensive technical documentation, is crucial. The process must prioritize regulatory compliance and patient safety above all other considerations. Question 3. Research into the conformity assessment routes available under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745. A manufacturer is developing a novel Class Roman III implantable device. Considering the device's high-risk nature and the regulatory requirements for such products, which of the following approaches to conformity assessment is the most appropriate and compliant? Option A. Annex Roman 9 conformity assessment based on a quality management system and on assessment of the technical documentation. Option B. Annex X type examination in combination with Annex Roman 11 conformity assessment based on production quality assurance. Option C. Annex V conformity assessment based on quality management system and product conformity verification. Option D. Annex Roman 4 declaration of conformity, followed by voluntary submission of technical documentation to a notified body. The correct answer is B. Annex X type examination, in combination with Annex Roman 11, conformity assessment based on production quality assurance. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge for regulatory affairs professionals. Selecting the appropriate conformity assessment route under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745 for a novel, high-risk medical device. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the device's risk class and understanding the implications of each conformity assessment route on the time to market, resource allocation, and the level of scrutiny by notified bodies. Careful judgment is required to balance regulatory compliance with business objectives. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of Annex Roman 9 and Annex X of the MDR, specifically how they apply to Class Roman III devices. For a Class Roman III device, Annex X type examination, combined with Annex Roman 11 production quality assurance, is the mandatory route. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the regulatory requirements for high-risk devices, ensuring the highest level of safety and performance assurance through rigorous assessment by a notified body. It prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else. An incorrect approach would be to assume that Annex Roman 9, conformity assessment based on a quality management system and on assessment of the technical documentation, is applicable or sufficient for a Class Roman III device without considering the specific provisions for this risk class. Annex Roman 9 is generally applicable to Class I, IA, and EIB devices, and while it involves a quality management system, it does not provide the same level of in-depth technical scrutiny of the device itself as Annex X. Relying solely on Annex Roman 9 for a Class Roman III device would be a significant regulatory failure, as it bypasses the mandatory type examination required for such devices, leading to non-compliance and potential risks to patient safety. Another incorrect approach would be to opt for a route that does not involve a notified body for a Class Roman III device. MDR clearly mandates notified body involvement for Class Roman III devices. Attempting to self-certify or use a route intended for low-risk devices would be a direct violation of the regulation, constituting a severe ethical and regulatory failure. A further incorrect approach would be to choose a conformity assessment route based solely on speed or perceived ease of implementation, without a proper risk assessment of the device and a clear understanding of the MDR's requirements for each risk class. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to prioritize patient safety, which is the cornerstone of medical device regulation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Accurately classify the medical device according to the MDR's classification rules. 2. Identify the relevant conformity assessment routes as specified in the MDR for that risk class. 3. Thoroughly review the specific requirements and implications of each applicable route, including the role and involvement of the notified body. 4. Consult relevant guidance documents from the European Commission and notified bodies. 5. Engage with the intended notified body early in the process to confirm the chosen route and understand their expectations. 6. Prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance in all decisions, even if it means a longer or more resource-intensive path. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that a manufacturer is developing a novel drug-eluting stent where the stent is the primary device and the drug is incorporated to provide a therapeutic effect. Considering the regulatory framework of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, which approach best ensures compliance for this combination product. Option A. The manufacturer should pursue conformity assessment for the device component under the MDR 2017/745 with a notified body and engage the EMA for the assessment of the medicinal substance, ensuring coordinated submissions and data sharing. Option B. The manufacturer should seek a CE mark for the entire drug-eluting stent solely through a notified body, as it is fundamentally a medical device. Option C. The manufacturer should independently obtain a CE mark for the stent from a notified body and a separate marketing authorization for the drug from the EMA, with no requirement for interagency communication. Option D. The manufacturer should engage the European Medicines Agency, EMA, for the CE marking of the entire drug-eluting stent, as the drug component dictates the primary regulatory pathway. The correct answer is B. The manufacturer should seek a CE mark for the entire drug-eluting stent solely through a notified body, as it is fundamentally a medical device. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the evolving regulatory landscape for medical devices, particularly concerning the interplay between the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, and the European Medicines Agency, EMA, for certain combination products. Manufacturers must navigate the distinct but sometimes overlapping requirements of these bodies to ensure compliance and market access. The challenge lies in accurately identifying which regulatory framework governs specific aspects of a product and understanding the appropriate channels for communication and submission. Misinterpreting these boundaries can lead to significant delays, non-compliance, and potential product recalls. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of the MDR 2017/745 and its scope, coupled with knowledge of the EMA's remit concerning medicinal substances. For a device that incorporates a medicinal substance, the MDR 2017/745 clearly defines that the medicinal substances compliance is assessed under the EU pharmaceutical legislation, while the device component falls under the MDR. Therefore, engaging with the EMA for the medicinal component and the notified body for the device component, while ensuring seamless integration and data sharing between the two assessments, represents best professional practice. This aligns with Article 117 of the MDR 2017/745, which addresses devices incorporating medicinal substances and emphasizes the need for coordination between the competent authorities for medicinal products and the notified bodies. This approach ensures that both aspects of the product are evaluated according to their respective legal frameworks, leading to a robust and compliant market authorization. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume that the entire combination product, including the medicinal substance, is solely regulated under the MDR 2017/745. It fails to acknowledge the specific provisions within the MDR that delegate the assessment of the medicinal component to pharmaceutical legislation and the EMA. This would lead to an incomplete regulatory submission and likely rejection. Another incorrect approach would be to exclusively engage the EMA for the entire product, without considering the device component's specific requirements under the MDR 2017/745. While the EMA would assess the medicinal part, the device's conformity assessment, including its CE marking, would be overlooked, rendering the product non-compliant with the MDR. A further incorrect approach would be to submit separate, uncoordinated applications to both the EMA and a notified body, without establishing clear communication channels or understanding how the assessments will be integrated. This lack of coordination can lead to conflicting information, duplicated efforts, and delays in obtaining the necessary approvals for both components. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach. First, meticulously analyze the product's composition and intended use to determine which regulatory frameworks apply to each component. Second, consult the MDR 2017/745, particularly Annex I, General Safety and Performance Requirements, and relevant articles like Article 117. Understand the specific requirements for combination products. Third, Identify the relevant competent authorities and notified bodies. Fourth, establish clear communication protocols and a strategy for coordinating submissions and assessments between the EMA and the notified body. Finally, maintain comprehensive documentation that demonstrates compliance with all applicable regulations for each component and their integration. Question 5. Compliance review shows that a novel product designed to be inserted into the body to deliver a therapeutic agent over a prolonged period is being classified solely as a Class E medical device under the MDR 2017/745. The therapeutic agent is released via a controlled diffusion mechanism inherent to the device material. The manufacturer's documentation emphasizes the device's physical properties and its role in the controlled release. However, the therapeutic agent itself is a well-established pharmaceutical substance. Which of the following classifications and regulatory considerations best reflects the MDR's framework for such a product? Option A. The product should be classified as a medical device, but its conformity assessment must also consider the pharmacological action of the delivered substance, potentially requiring consultation with pharmaceutical regulatory bodies or specific provisions for combination products under the MDR. Option B. The product is definitively a medical device because its primary intended action is achieved through the physical properties of the device material facilitating diffusion. Option C. The product is a medicinal product due to the presence of a pharmaceutical substance, and therefore falls outside the scope of the MDR 2017/745. Option D. The product is a combination product and should be regulated under separate legislation for medicinal products, with no relevance to the MDR. The correct answer is A. The product should be classified as a medical device, but its conformity assessment must also consider the pharmacological action of the delivered substance, potentially requiring consultation with pharmaceutical regulatory bodies or specific provisions for combination products under the MDR. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory affairs, distinguishing between closely related but distinct definitions under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745. The challenge lies in the nuanced application of these definitions to real-world product classifications and intended uses, which directly impacts conformity assessment routes, documentation requirements, and ultimately, market access. Misinterpreting these terms can lead to significant compliance gaps, potential patient harm, and severe regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves a meticulous examination of the device's intended purpose, its mechanism of action, and its interaction with the human body, strictly adhering to the definitions provided in Article 2 of the MDR. This ensures accurate classification and appropriate conformity assessment, aligning with the regulation's objective of ensuring a high level of safety and performance. It represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory integrity by correctly applying the legal definitions. An incorrect approach that fails to differentiate between a medical device and a medicinal product, as defined in the EU, or a combination product, which might fall under different EU legislation or require specific considerations, would lead to the application of incorrect regulatory pathways. For instance, treating a device with a significant medicinal component solely under the MDR, without considering the medicinal aspect, could result in inadequate safety and efficacy evaluation for the medicinal component, a failure to comply with pharmaceutical legislation, and a breach of ethical obligations to ensure comprehensive product assessment. Similarly, misclassifying a device based on a superficial understanding of its function, rather than its precise intended purpose and mechanism, would bypass essential regulatory scrutiny, potentially exposing patients to risks associated with inadequately assessed devices. Professionals should approach such situations by first identifying the core function and intended use of the product. They must then consult Article 2 of the MDR 2017/745 to find the most relevant definitions. If the product's characteristics span multiple regulatory domains e.g., device and medicinal product, they must determine if the primary intended action is achieved by physical means or by pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic means. If the primary action is achieved by pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic means, it is likely a medicinal product. If the device achieves its primary intended action by physical means, It is a medical device. For products where both aspects are significant, further investigation into specific EU guidance on combination products or the primary mode of action is crucial. This systematic, definition-driven approach, grounded in the MDR's legal text, is essential for accurate regulatory classification and compliant market entry. Question 6. Which approach would be most effective for a medical device manufacturer to ensure compliance with the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, for their existing portfolio of devices, considering the staggered deadlines and the significant changes in requirements? Option A. Focus exclusively on meeting the new technical documentation requirements, assuming that post-market surveillance and vigilance will be addressed separately and later. Option B. Delay all significant MDR compliance activities until the final deadlines for legacy devices approach to minimize disruption to current operations. Option C. Undertake a comprehensive, simultaneous overhaul of all devices' compliance documentation and processes at once to achieve full MDR compliance as quickly as possible. Option D. Implement a phased strategy, prioritizing devices based on their risk class and the MDR's sunset dates for legacy devices, while concurrently updating technical documentation and post-market surveillance plans. The correct answer is D. Implement a phased strategy, prioritizing devices based on their risk class and the MDR's sunset dates for legacy devices, while concurrently updating technical documentation and post-market surveillance plans. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge faced by manufacturers under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, managing the transition of legacy devices to the new regulatory framework. This is professionally challenging due to the significant time and resource investment required, the potential for market disruption if compliance is not achieved, and the need to balance ongoing commercial activities with the stringent new requirements. The inherent complexity of the MDR, including its enhanced requirements for clinical evidence, post-market surveillance, and technical documentation, necessitates careful strategic planning and execution. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive, phased strategy that prioritizes devices based on their risk class and the urgency of their certification deadlines under the MDR. This approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the tiered implementation timeline stipulated by the MDR and allows for efficient allocation of resources. By focusing on high-risk devices and those with approaching sunset dates first, manufacturers can mitigate the risk of non-compliance and ensure continued market access for critical medical technologies. This strategy also facilitates a more manageable workload for regulatory, quality, and R&D teams, fostering a systematic and controlled transition. It demonstrates a commitment to patient safety and product compliance, core ethical and regulatory tenets of the MDR. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to delay significant MDR compliance activities until closer to the sunset dates for legacy devices. This is a regulatory failure because it significantly increases the risk of non-compliance, potentially leading to devices being withdrawn from the market and causing supply chain disruptions. It also creates immense pressure on internal teams, increasing the likelihood of errors and omissions in the technical documentation and conformity assessment processes. Ethically, it prioritizes short-term commercial convenience over patient safety by not ensuring timely adherence to the MDR's enhanced safety and performance requirements. Another incorrect approach is to attempt a Big Bang transition, where all MDR compliance activities are initiated simultaneously without prioritization. This is professionally unsustainable and likely to lead to overwhelming resource strain, project delays, and a high probability of incomplete or inadequate submissions. It fails to acknowledge the scale of the undertaking and the need for a structured, iterative process. This approach demonstrates a lack of strategic planning and an underestimation of the MDR's complexity, risking both regulatory noncompliance and significant financial and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on meeting the minimum documentation requirements without considering the broader implications for post-market surveillance and vigilance. The MDR emphasizes a life-cycle approach to device safety. Neglecting these aspects during the transition phase means that even if a device is certified, the manufacturer may be ill-equipped to manage its ongoing safety and performance in the market, leading to potential regulatory scrutiny and ethical concerns regarding patient safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based phased implementation strategy. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the MDR's requirements and the specific implications for each device in their portfolio. 2. Categorizing devices by risk class and identifying their respective MDR certification deadlines. 3. Developing a detailed project plan with clear milestones, resource allocation, and timelines, prioritizing high-risk devices and those with earlier deadlines. 4. Engaging cross-functional teams, regulatory, quality, R&D, clinical, manufacturing, early and continuously. 5. Regularly reviewing progress, adapting the plan as needed, and proactively addressing any emerging challenges. This systematic and proactive approach ensures compliance, minimizes business risk, and upholds the ethical responsibility to ensure the safety and performance of medical devices. Question 7. The review process indicates that a manufacturer of a novel Class EIB implantable device has submitted a clinical evaluation report, CER, that heavily relies on clinical data from a previously marketed but structurally different device. The manufacturer argues that the intended use and general patient population are the same, and that the differences in material composition and design are minor. What is the most appropriate course of action for the regulatory affairs professional to ensure compliance with the Medical Device Regulation 2017/745? Option A. Recommend that the manufacturer revise the CER to emphasize the historical success of the previous device, downplaying the significance of the material and design differences. Option B. Advise the manufacturer to focus solely on the preclinical data for the novel device, as this is sufficient to demonstrate safety for an implantable device. Option C. Request a detailed justification of equivalence, specifically addressing the technical, biological, and clinical characteristics of both devices, and require the manufacturer to generate additional clinical data if equivalence cannot be robustly demonstrated for the novel aspects. Option D. Accept the submitted CER as sufficient, given the similar intended use and patient population, and proceed with the regulatory submission. The correct answer is C. Request a detailed justification of equivalence, specifically addressing the technical, biological, and clinical characteristics of both devices, and require the manufacturer to generate additional clinical data if equivalence cannot be robustly demonstrated for the novel aspects. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential gap in the clinical evaluation report, CER, for a novel Class EIB medical device intended for long-term implantation. The challenge lies in ensuring the CER adequately addresses the specific risks associated with long-term implantation, particularly concerning biocompatibility, material degradation, and potential late-onset adverse events, all within the stringent requirements of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745. The manufacturer has submitted data from a similar, previously marketed device, but the novelty of the new device's material composition and design necessitates a thorough evaluation of its own clinical data, or robust justification for its equivalence. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the MDR's emphasis on a proactive and comprehensive clinical evaluation throughout the device lifecycle. Article 61 and Annex Roman 14 of the MDR mandate that manufacturers demonstrate the safety and performance of their devices through clinical evaluation, which must be updated with post-market surveillance data. Focusing on the specific clinical data for the novel device, or a rigorously justified equivalence to an existing device with comparable clinical data, ensures that the unique risks and benefits of the new technology are adequately assessed. This approach prioritizes patient safety by demanding evidence directly relevant to the device in question, thereby fulfilling the manufacturer's obligation under the MDR to provide a CER that is scientifically sound and reflects the current state of the art. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical data from a dissimilar device without a robust equivalence demonstration fails to meet the MDR's requirements for a device-specific CER. This is a regulatory failure because Annex Roman 14, Part A, Section 3 explicitly states that equivalence must be demonstrated based on technical, biological, and clinical characteristics. Relying on a superficial similarity without addressing material differences or design innovations is a direct contravention of this requirement. Another incorrect approach, which involves downplaying the significance of long-term implantation risks due to the device's classification, represents an ethical and regulatory failure. The MDR does not permit a tiered approach to risk assessment based on device classification alone. All risks must be thoroughly evaluated. Furthermore, a failure to proactively seek additional clinical data when existing data is insufficient, instead opting to proceed with a potentially incomplete CER, demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the principle of continuous improvement mandated by the MDR. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a systematic approach. First, thoroughly understand the device's intended use, its novelty, and its classification. Second, meticulously review the existing clinical data against the requirements of Annex Roman 14. Third, critically assess the strength of any proposed equivalence, ensuring it addresses all relevant technical, biological, and clinical aspects. Fourth, identify any data gaps and proactively plan for their closure, whether through further literature review, preclinical testing, or clinical investigations. Finally, document the entire process transparently and justify all conclusions within the CER. Question 8. The analysis reveals that a medical device manufacturer based outside the European Union is preparing to place a new Class EIB device on the EU market. They have appointed an authorized representative R, located in Germany, and have entered into an agreement with a distributor in France. The manufacturer has not directly verified the importer's registration status with the relevant EU competent authority, assuming this is handled by the AR. Furthermore, the manufacturer has not established a direct contractual relationship with the importer, who is based in Italy and handles the initial import into the EU. Which of the following actions by the manufacturer best ensures compliance with the EU Medical Device Regulation 2017/745 regarding their obligations for the AR, importer, and distributor? Option A. The manufacturer should focus solely on ensuring the distributor in France is compliant, as they are the final point of sale to healthcare professionals and thus bear the primary responsibility for market placement. Option B. The manufacturer should ensure the authorized representative has a robust internal process for vetting importers and distributors, and then consider their own due diligence complete. Option C. The manufacturer should proactively verify the importer's registration with the competent authority in Italy, and establish a direct contractual agreement with the importer that clearly outlines their responsibilities under the MDR, in addition to confirming the AR's mandate and the distributor's role. Option D. The manufacturer should rely on the authorized representative to independently manage all aspects of importer compliance and contractual agreements, as this is within the AR's defined scope of responsibilities. The correct answer is C. The manufacturer should proactively verify the importer's registration with the competent authority in Italy and establish a direct contractual agreement with the importer that clearly outlines their responsibilities under the MDR, in addition to confirming the AR's mandate and the distributor's role. Explanation. The analysis reveals a common implementation challenge faced by manufacturers of medical devices under the EU MDR 2017/745, ensuring clear and compliant definition of roles and responsibilities across the supply chain, particularly when engaging with entities outside the EU. This scenario is professionally challenging because the manufacturer, while ultimately responsible for the device's conformity, relies heavily on the correct functioning and compliance of its appointed authorized representative, R, importer, and distributor. Misunderstandings or failures in defining these roles can lead to significant compliance gaps, market access delays, and potential risks to patient safety. Careful judgment is required to proactively establish robust contractual agreements and oversight mechanisms. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the manufacturer's ultimate responsibility under Article 10 of the MDR, ensuring the AR is established within the EU and has a clear mandate to act on the manufacturer's behalf, and by verifying the importer's compliance with their obligations, including registration and documentation. The manufacturer establishes a compliant pathway for placing the device on the EU market. This proactive verification and clear contractual definition of responsibilities, as mandated by the MDR, minimizes the risk of non-compliance and ensures that all parties understand their legal obligations. An incorrect approach, where the manufacturer assumes the AR's internal processes are sufficient without independent verification, is a significant regulatory failure. The MDR places the onus on the manufacturer to ensure their AR is competent and compliant. Relying solely on the AR's self-declaration without due diligence can lead to the appointment of an unqualified or non-compliant AR, jeopardizing the device's conformity and market access. Ethically, this failure can lead to placing non-compliant devices on the market, potentially harming patients. Another incorrect approach, where the manufacturer delegates the responsibility of verifying the importer's compliance to the distributor, is also a regulatory failure. While distributors have their own obligations, the primary responsibility for ensuring the importer meets MDR requirements lies with the manufacturer and their appointed AR. This delegation creates a gap in oversight and can result in an importer who is not properly registered or is failing to meet their documentation requirements, leading to potential market withdrawal and penalties. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Understand the manufacturer's ultimate responsibility under Article 10 of the MDR. 2. Clearly define the scope of the authorized representative's mandate and ensure their establishment within the EU. 3. Proactively verify the compliance of the appointed authorized representative, including their understanding of the MDR and their ability to fulfill their obligations. 4. Establish clear contractual agreements with all economic operators importer, distributor, that explicitly define their respective responsibilities under the MDR. 5. Implement a robust system for verifying the importer's compliance, including their registration with the competent authorities and their adherence to documentation requirements. 6. Maintain ongoing oversight of the supply chain to ensure continued compliance. Question 9. Operational review demonstrates that a manufacturer is preparing to launch a novel medical device intended for diagnostic imaging. The device utilizes advanced AI algorithms to analyze patient scans and provide preliminary diagnostic suggestions to clinicians. The manufacturer has conducted extensive clinical validation and has a robust quality management system in place. However, they are seeking to expedite the CE marking process to gain a competitive advantage. Which of the following represents the most appropriate regulatory pathway under Regulation EU 2017/745 to ensure compliant market access for this device? Option A. Prioritize the AI algorithm's performance metrics and technical innovation, deferring detailed review of the general safety and performance requirements until after market launch. Option B. Accurately classify the device according to Annex Roman 8 of the MDR. Identify the appropriate conformity assessment route based on its classification, likely involving a notified body for AI-driven diagnostic software. Compile comprehensive technical documentation demonstrating compliance with Annex I general safety and performance requirements, and then proceed with the EU Declaration of Conformity and CE marking. Option C. Assume a lower-risk classification for the device to streamline the conformity assessment process, focusing primarily on the device's core functionality and technical specifications. Option D. Proceed directly to affixing the CE marking based on the internal quality management system and clinical validation, without explicit confirmation of the conformity assessment route from a notified body. The correct answer is B. Accurately classify the device according to Annex Roman 8 of the MDR. Identify the appropriate conformity assessment route based on its classification, likely involving a notified body for AI-driven diagnostic software. Compile comprehensive technical documentation demonstrating compliance with Annex I general safety and performance requirements, and then proceed with the EU Declaration of Conformity and CE marking. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory affairs, balancing the need for market access with the imperative to comply with evolving regulatory requirements. The introduction of a new medical device requires a thorough understanding of the EU regulatory framework, specifically Regulation EU 2017/745 MDR. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the device's classification, identifying the appropriate conformity assessment route, and ensuring all necessary documentation is in place before placing it on the market. Misinterpreting or overlooking any of these aspects can lead to significant delays, noncompliance, and potential harm to patients. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive review of the device against the MDR's requirements. This includes accurately classifying the device based on its intended purpose and inherent risks, as defined in Annex Roman 8 of the MDR. Following classification, the manufacturer must identify the correct conformity assessment procedure outlined in Annex Roman 9, X, or Roman 11, depending on the device class. Crucially, this involves compiling a technical documentation as specified in Annex Roman 2 and Roman 3, demonstrating conformity with the General Safety and Performance Requirements, GSPR, in Annex I. The final step is to draw up an EU Declaration of Conformity and affix the CE marking. This methodical approach ensures all legal obligations under the MDR are met, thereby facilitating safe and compliant market access. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume the device falls into a lower risk class than it actually does. This could lead to selecting an inappropriate and less stringent conformity assessment procedure, bypassing essential safety checks, and potentially placing a higher risk device on the market without adequate scrutiny. This is a direct violation of the MDR's risk-based approach and compromises patient safety. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the technical aspects of the device without adequately addressing the GSPR. The MDR emphasizes not just the device's functionality, but also its safety and performance throughout its life cycle. Neglecting the GSPR means the manufacturer fails to demonstrate that the device is safe and performs as intended, a fundamental requirement for CE marking. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with market placement without obtaining the necessary notified body involvement for high-risk classes. The MDR clearly delineates when a notified body's involvement is mandatory for conformity assessment. Bypassing this requirement for devices that necessitate it is a clear breach of the regulation and renders the CE marking invalid. Professional reasoning. Professionals in regulatory affairs must adopt a proactive and diligent approach. This involves staying abreast of the MDR's provisions, utilizing official guidance documents from the Medical Device Coordination Group, MDCG, and engaging with competent authorities or notified bodies when in doubt. A robust internal quality management system is essential to ensure all steps of the regulatory process are meticulously followed. When faced with uncertainty, seeking expert advice or clarification from regulatory bodies is always the most prudent course of action, prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else. Question 10. Quality control measures reveal an unexpected increase in serious adverse events, SAEs, reported during a post-market clinical follow-up, PMCF study for a novel implantable cardiac device. These SAEs, while not immediately life-threatening, suggest a potential, previously uncharacterized risk associated with the device's performance in a specific patient subgroup. The manufacturer's regulatory affairs team is aware of these findings. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action according to the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745? Option A. Immediately suspend the PMCF study, report all identified SAEs to the relevant competent authorities and the Ethics Committee without delay, and initiate a thorough investigation into the root cause of these events. Option B. Continue the PMCF study as planned while internally analyzing the SAE data to confirm the trend, and only report the findings to authorities if the internal analysis indicates a significant risk. Option C. Immediately terminate the PMCF study and recall all distributed devices of this type, without further investigation or reporting, to err on the side of caution. Option D. Inform the principal investigators of the PMCF study about the potential trend in SAEs and advise them to monitor their patients more closely, without immediately reporting to competent authorities or suspending the study. The correct answer is A. Immediately suspend the PMCF study, report all identified SAEs to the relevant competent authorities and the Ethics Committee without delay, and initiate a thorough investigation into the root cause of these events. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need to gather robust clinical evidence for a novel medical device and the ethical imperative to protect patient safety and well-being. The discovery of unexpected adverse events during a clinical investigation necessitates immediate, decisive action that balances scientific integrity with patient welfare. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action, considering the potential impact on the investigation's validity, the manufacturer's regulatory obligations, and the safety of ongoing participants. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance as mandated by the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, promptly reporting the serious adverse events to the relevant competent authorities and the Ethics Committee, as well as suspending the investigation, demonstrates adherence to Article 74 and Annex Roman 14 of the MDR. This proactive stance ensures that regulatory bodies are informed and can assess the situation, and it halts further potential harm to participants. Furthermore, it aligns with the ethical principles of beneficence and non-maleficence, ensuring that the well-being of research subjects is paramount. The subsequent review of the data and the decision to resume or terminate the investigation based on a thorough risk-benefit assessment, informed by the reported events, exemplifies a scientifically sound and ethically responsible process. An incorrect approach that involves continuing the investigation without immediate reporting and suspension would constitute a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate the manufacturer's obligation under Article 74 of the MDR to inform competent authorities of any serious adverse event without undue delay. Ethically, it breaches the principle of non-maleficence by potentially exposing more participants to harm. Another incorrect approach, such as immediately terminating the investigation without a thorough review and reporting, might be premature and could lead to the loss of valuable data that could inform future device development or risk mitigation strategies, potentially hindering overall patient benefit in the long run and failing to fulfill the reporting obligations. Third incorrect approach, focusing solely on internal data analysis without engaging the competent authorities and ethics committee, would bypass crucial oversight mechanisms designed to protect research participants and ensure the integrity of the clinical investigation process, thereby failing to meet the requirements of Article 74 and Annex Roman 14. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Immediate assessment of the reported adverse events to determine their seriousness and potential causal link to the device. 2. Prompt notification of the sponsor, principal investigator, and ethics committee. 3. Suspension of the clinical investigation if there is a significant risk to participants. 4. Formal reporting of serious adverse events to the relevant competent authorities as required by the MDR. 5. Comprehensive data analysis to understand the nature, frequency, and causality of the events. 6. Risk-benefit re-evaluation of the device and the investigation. 7. Decision-making regarding the continuation, modification, or termination of the investigation in consultation with regulatory bodies and ethics committees. 8. Communication of findings and decisions to all relevant stakeholders. Question 11. During the evaluation of post-market surveillance data for an active implantable medical device that has been CE marked and is widely used, the manufacturer identifies a trend of subtle, but increasing, reports of device malfunction leading to reduced therapeutic efficacy, which appears to be linked to a recently identified environmental factor not previously considered in the risk assessment. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the manufacturer to ensure ongoing compliance with the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745? Option A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the post-market surveillance data. Consult with relevant clinical and technical experts to assess the implications of the new environmental factor on the device's safety and performance in light of the current state of the art, and determine if updates to the technical documentation, risk management file, or other aspects of the conformity assessment are required. Option B. Immediately halt all further distribution and use of the device until a full investigation can be completed, without first conducting an initial assessment of the data and its potential impact. Option C. Rely on the initial conformity assessment conducted prior to placing the device on the market, assuming that the device's design and risk management adequately addressed all foreseeable risks and that the reported malfunctions are isolated incidents. Option D. Continue to monitor the trend closely and only initiate a formal review if the number of reported malfunctions escalates significantly to a level that triggers mandatory reporting requirements under the MDR. The correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the post-market surveillance data. Consult with relevant clinical and technical experts to assess the implications of the new environmental factor on the device's safety and performance in light of the current state of the art, and determine if updates to the technical documentation, risk management file, or other aspects of the conformity assessment are required. Explanation. This scenario presents a significant implementation challenge for a manufacturer of an active implantable medical device under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745. The core difficulty lies in ensuring the continued compliance of a device that has been on the market for some time, particularly when faced with evolving post-market surveillance data and potential changes in the state of the art. The manufacturer must balance the need to maintain market access with the imperative to protect patient safety and ensure the device remains compliant with the MDR's stringent requirements. This requires a proactive and robust approach to post-market surveillance and a willingness to adapt to new information. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a commitment to the MDR's core principles of safety and performance throughout the device's lifecycle. By initiating a thorough review of the post-market surveillance data and consulting with experts to assess the state of the art, the manufacturer is proactively identifying potential risks and ensuring the device's continued conformity. This aligns directly with the MDR's emphasis on continuous vigilance and the obligation to update technical documentation and risk management when necessary. This approach prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance over simply maintaining the status quo. An incorrect approach that involves delaying a formal review until a significant number of adverse events are reported would be a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This inaction would violate the MDR's requirement for proactive post-market surveillance and the manufacturer's obligation to assess and address emerging risks promptly. Ethically, it prioritizes commercial interests over patient well-being. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on the initial conformity assessment without considering new data, demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the MDR's lifecycle approach to device regulation. This failure to adapt to the evolving state of the art and new clinical evidence could lead to the continued use of a device that is no longer safe or performing as intended, posing a direct risk to patients. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes a risk-based, proactive approach to post-market surveillance. This involves establishing clear internal processes for collecting, analyzing, and acting upon post-market data. When new information emerges, especially concerning an active implantable device, the immediate step should be a comprehensive assessment of its implications for the device's safety and performance. This assessment should involve relevant internal expertise and, where necessary, external specialists. The decision to update technical documentation, risk management files, or even initiate a field corrective action should be driven by this assessment, ensuring that patient safety and regulatory compliance are always paramount. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals that a medical device manufacturer, having successfully obtained a CE certificate from a notified body for its novel implantable device, is now operating under the assumption that the notified body certification guarantees the device's absolute safety and performance throughout its entire market lifespan, and that any post-market issues are solely the responsibility of the notified body to address. Which of the following interpretations of the notified body's role under the MDR 2017/745 best reflects the regulatory framework and professional best practice? Option A. The notified body's role is to provide an absolute guarantee of product safety, and its certification effectively transfers all liability for the device's performance from the manufacturer to the notified body. Option B. The manufacturer can rely on the notified body's ongoing vigilance to ensure the device continues to meet all regulatory requirements, and the manufacturer's internal quality management system only needs to be maintained at a basic level to support the notified body's oversight. Option C. The notified body, having issued the CE certificate, is now primarily responsible for monitoring the device's performance in the market and proactively identifying and rectifying any potential safety concerns that may arise post-certification. Option D. The notified body's CE certificate confirms that the manufacturer has demonstrated compliance with the applicable requirements of the MDR at the time of certification, but the ultimate responsibility for the device's safety and performance throughout its life cycle remains with the manufacturer. The correct answer is D. The notified body's CE certificate confirms that the manufacturer has demonstrated compliance with the applicable requirements of the MDR at the time of certification, but the ultimate responsibility for the device's safety and performance throughout its life cycle remains with the manufacturer. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of the notified body's (NB) role within the conformity assessment process under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745. The core of the challenge lies in distinguishing between the NB's oversight responsibilities and the manufacturer's ultimate accountability for device safety and performance. A superficial understanding could lead to misinterpreting the NB's involvement as a guarantee of absolute product safety, rather than a verification of the manufacturer's compliance with regulatory requirements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the manufacturer does not abdicate its responsibilities and that the NB fulfills its mandate without overstepping its defined authority. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it accurately reflects the division of responsibilities outlined in the MDR. The NB's role is to conduct an independent conformity assessment based on the documentation and evidence provided by the manufacturer. This assessment verifies that the manufacturer has met the requirements of the MDR, including the establishment of a robust quality management system and the compilation of comprehensive technical documentation. The NB's issuance of a CE certificate signifies that, at the time of assessment, the device and the manufacturer's systems appear to comply with the relevant requirements. This approach upholds the integrity of the conformity assessment process and ensures that the manufacturer remains the primary responsible party for the ongoing safety and performance of its devices throughout their life cycle. An incorrect approach that suggests the NB's CE certificate absolves the manufacturer of all further responsibility for device safety is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. The MDR clearly places the ultimate responsibility for the safety and performance of a medical device on the manufacturer. The NB's role is one of assessment and certification, not ongoing product stewardship. Another incorrect approach, which implies the NB is responsible for proactively identifying all potential future risks or unforeseen issues with a device after certification, also represents a failure. The NB's assessment is based on the information available and the state of the art at the time of certification. Post-market surveillance and vigilance are the manufacturer's responsibility, with the NB playing a role in reviewing certain aspects of these activities as part of ongoing oversight. A third incorrect approach, where the manufacturer relies solely on the NB's opinion without conducting its own thorough internal verification and validation, demonstrates a failure to establish and maintain its own robust quality management system and technical documentation, which are fundamental requirements of the MDR. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a clear understanding of the MDR's articles and annexes pertaining to conformity assessment procedures and the roles of manufacturers and NBs. Professionals should always refer to the specific requirements for the chosen conformity assessment route, e.g., Annex Roman 9, Annex X, Annex Roman 11. They must critically evaluate the scope and limitations of the NB's assessment and ensure that all manufacturer responsibilities, particularly those related to the quality management system, technical documentation, clinical evaluation, and post-market surveillance, are fully understood and diligently implemented. A proactive and diligent approach, coupled with continuous reference to the MDR and relevant harmonized standards, is essential for navigating these complexities. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates a recent software update that introduces a novel predictive algorithm for early detection of critical patient physiological anomalies. Considering the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, which approach best ensures continued compliance and patient safety following this update? Option A. Implement the software update and rely solely on post-market surveillance data to identify any potential issues related to the new predictive algorithm. Option B. Update the device's technical documentation to reflect the new algorithm and consider it a routine maintenance activity without further regulatory review. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of the software update, evaluating its effect on the device's classification, intended purpose, risk profile, and conformity assessment requirements, and engage with the notified body if significant changes are identified. Option D. Proceed with the software update, assuming it is a minor enhancement that does not alter the device's original classification or require further conformity assessment under the MDR. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment of the software update, evaluating its effect on the device's classification, intended purpose, risk profile, and conformity assessment requirements, and engage with the notified body if significant changes are identified. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge because the software component of a medical device, intended for monitoring patient vital signs, has been updated to include a new algorithm for predicting potential adverse events. This update, while beneficial for patient care, introduces complexity regarding its classification and the associated conformity assessment procedures under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745. The core challenge lies in determining whether this software update, by adding predictive capabilities, fundamentally alters the device's intended purpose or introduces new risks that necessitate a reevaluation of its classification and the entire conformity assessment process. Professional judgment is crucial to ensure patient safety and regulatory compliance without imposing unnecessary burdens. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment of the software update against the MDR requirements. This assessment must meticulously evaluate the new algorithm's functionality, its potential impact on the device's overall performance, any new risks introduced, and whether the update changes the device's intended purpose or classification. If the update is deemed a significant change that affects the device's classification or introduces new risks, a reassessment of the conformity assessment procedure, potentially involving notified body involvement, is required. This aligns with the MDR's emphasis on ensuring that devices placed on the market are safe and perform as intended throughout their life cycle, especially when modifications are made. It represents best professional practice by prioritizing patient safety and adhering to the regulatory framework's intent to manage evolving device technologies. An incorrect approach would be to assume that any software update, regardless of its functional changes, can be implemented without a formal impact assessment or reevaluation of conformity. For instance, simply applying the same conformity assessment procedure as for the original device without considering the new predictive algorithm's implications would be a regulatory failure. This overlooks the MDR's requirement for ongoing conformity assessment and the need to address changes that could affect the device's safety or performance. Another incorrect approach would be to classify the software update as a minor change and proceed without any further assessment, even if the new algorithm significantly alters the device's risk profile or intended use. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to comply with the MDR's principles of risk management and continuous conformity. Ethically, such an approach could lead to the marketing of a device with unassessed risks, potentially endangering patients. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the scope and nature of the software update. Second, conduct a comprehensive risk assessment specifically for the updated software and its integration into the device. Third, evaluate the update against the MDR's classification rules and the device's intended purpose. Fourth, determine if the update necessitates a change in the device's classification or requires re-engagement with a notified body. Finally, document all assessments and decisions thoroughly, ensuring traceability and compliance with the MDR's requirements for post-market surveillance and change management. Question 14. Regulatory review indicates that a manufacturer has developed a novel device designed to measure ambient temperature and humidity in a patient's room to optimize comfort. The manufacturer claims the device is intended to improve patient well-being by ensuring a conducive environment, but it has no direct diagnostic, therapeutic, or monitoring function related to a specific medical condition. Based on the Medical Device Regulation 2017/745 MDR, which of the following assessments of this product's regulatory status is most accurate? Option A. The product is a medical device under the MDR because it is used in a healthcare environment and aims to improve patient comfort, which indirectly relates to health outcomes. Option B. The product is not a medical device under the MDR, as its intended purpose does not meet the definition of a medical device as per Article 2(1) of the MDR, nor does it fall under any specific exclusions listed in Article 2(2) or Annex Roman 16. Option C. The product is not a medical device under the MDR because it is a general environmental monitoring device and therefore falls under a specific exemption for environmental control equipment. Option D. The product is a medical device under the MDR because it is a novel electronic device that measures environmental parameters, and such devices are generally covered by the regulation. The correct answer is A. The product is a medical device under the MDR because it is used in a healthcare environment and aims to improve patient comfort, which indirectly relates to health outcomes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs, determining the precise scope of application of the MDR 2017/745, particularly when a product's intended use might blur the lines between a medical device and other product categories. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting the definition of a medical device and identifying potential exemptions under the regulation, ensuring compliance without overregulation or underregulation. Misinterpretation can lead to significant legal, financial, and patient safety risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a meticulous examination of the product's intended purpose as stated by the manufacturer and its mode of action. This requires a thorough understanding of Article 2(1) of the MDR 2017/745, which defines a medical device. Crucially, it necessitates evaluating whether the product falls under any of the specific exclusions outlined in Article 2(2) of the MDR. For instance, if the product is intended for general hygiene purposes and does not meet the definition of a medical device, or if it is a medicinal product, it would be excluded. The key is to apply the MDR's definitions and exclusions rigorously and objectively, based on the evidence provided by the manufacturer regarding the product's design, function, and intended use. This approach ensures that only products falling within the MDR scope are regulated under it, while others are subject to their appropriate regulatory frameworks, thereby safeguarding patient safety and facilitating market access for compliant devices. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume that because a product is used in a healthcare setting or has a health-related function, it automatically falls under the MDR. This ignores the specific definitions and exclusions within the regulation. For example, a simple cleaning cloth used for general surface disinfection in a hospital might not meet the definition of a medical device if its intended purpose is not to diagnose, prevent, monitor, predict, prognosticate, treat, or alleviate disease, injury, or disability. Regulating it under the MDR would be an overreach, creating unnecessary burdens. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the product's physical characteristics or its similarity to other devices already on the market, without critically assessing its specific intended purpose and mode of action against the MDR's criteria. A product might look like a medical device but have a different intended use that places it outside the MDR scope. For example, a device intended purely for aesthetic enhancement without any therapeutic or diagnostic claims might not be a medical device under the MDR. Finally, assuming a product is exempt simply because it is not explicitly listed as a medical device is a flawed strategy. The MDR scope is defined by what is a medical device, and exemptions are specific. A thorough review against the definition and exclusions in Article 2 is mandatory, not an assumption of exemption. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding the manufacturer's stated intended purpose for the product. 2. Analyzing the product's mode of action. 3. Comparing these against the definition of a medical device in Article 2(1) of the MDR 2017/745. 4. If it appears to meet the definition, then meticulously checking against the exclusions in Article 2(2) and Annex Roman 16 of the MDR 2017/745. 5. Documenting the rationale for the classification decision, including the specific articles and definitions used. 6. Seeking expert opinion or clarification from competent authorities if there is any ambiguity. This structured process ensures a robust and defensible classification decision. Prioritizing patient safety and regulatory compliance. Question 15. The monitoring system demonstrates a novel non-invasive optical sensor designed to continuously measure blood glucose levels. It also incorporates an advanced algorithm that predicts potential hypoglycemic or hyperglycemic events within the next 12 hours and provides proactive alerts to the user. Based on the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, which classification rule is most appropriate for this device, considering its predictive capabilities and the critical nature of blood glucose management? Option A, Rule 1, due to its function in monitoring, prediction, and prevention of potentially life-threatening physiological conditions. Option B, Rule 6, as it involves an active device with a diagnostic function. Option C, Rule 1, solely based on its function as a monitoring device for a physiological parameter. Option D, Rule 1, focusing on the non-invasive nature of the sensor technology. The correct answer is A, Rule 1, due to its function in monitoring, prediction, and prevention of potentially life-threatening physiological conditions. Explanation: the monitoring system demonstrates a potential issue with a novel medical device intended for continuous physiological monitoring. The challenge lies in accurately classifying this device under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, as its functionality and intended use may not neatly fit into predefined categories, requiring a thorough understanding of the classification rules. The device incorporates a sensor that measures blood glucose levels non-invasively through optical means, coupled with an algorithm that predicts future glucose trends and alerts the user to potential hypo or hyperglycemic events. This prediction capability, especially for potentially life-threatening events, elevates the risk profile. The correct approach involves a meticulous application of the MDR classification rules, specifically focusing on Rule 1, which addresses devices intended for diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction, prognosis, treatment, or alleviation of disease. Given the device's ability to monitor, predict, and alert for potentially critical physiological states, hypo/hyperglycemia, it clearly falls under the scope of Rule 1. The predictive element, aimed at preventing serious harm, further pushes it towards a higher risk class. A deep analysis of the device's intended purpose, the nature of the physiological parameter monitored, blood glucose, critical for metabolic health, and the potential consequences of failure, misprediction leading to severe health outcomes, is paramount. This systematic evaluation, considering the device's primary function and potential impact on patient health, leads to the correct classification. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the monitoring aspect and classify it as a lower-risk device, overlooking the predictive and alert functions. This failure to consider the full scope of the device's intended use and its potential to prevent serious harm is a direct contravention of Rule 1 and the overarching principles of the MDR, which prioritize patient safety. Another incorrect approach might be to classify it based on the technology used, e.g., optical sensor, without adequately assessing its medical purpose and risk. This technological-centric view ignores the regulatory framework's focus on the device's function and potential impact. A further incorrect approach could be to misinterpret prediction as purely informational rather than as a proactive measure to prevent adverse events, thereby underestimating the associated risks. Such misinterpretations lead to inadequate conformity assessment procedures and potentially place unsafe devices on the market. The professional decision-making process for such situations requires a structured approach. 1. Understand the device. Thoroughly review the device's intended purpose, mechanism of action, and all functionalities. 2. Identify relevant classification rules. Systematically go through the MDR Annex Roman 8 classification rules, considering all applicable rules. 3. Analyze the primary risk. Determine the primary risk associated with the device's use and potential failure, considering the physiological parameter and the consequences of misdiagnosis or malfunction. 4. Justify the classification. Clearly document the rationale for the chosen classification, referencing specific rules and the device's characteristics. 5. Seek expert opinion. If there is ambiguity, consult with regulatory experts or notified bodies. Question 16. Stakeholder feedback indicates a recurring issue with a specific user interface element of a Class EIB medical device, leading to potential user error and, in rare instances, an adverse event. The manufacturer's current risk management file, based on ISO 14971, does not explicitly detail this specific user interface failure mode or its associated risks. What is the most appropriate regulatory compliant action to take? Option A. Disregard the feedback as it pertains to user error, which is outside the scope of the device's inherent risks as defined in the initial risk assessment. Option B. Immediately update the risk management file to include the identified user interface failure mode, reevaluate the associated risks, and implement appropriate risk control measures, documenting all changes and their verification. Option C. Create a separate addendum to the risk management file that only details the user feedback and the proposed solution, without reevaluating the overall risk profile of the device. Option D. Acknowledge the feedback internally and instruct the development team to address the issue in the next planned product update, without formally revising the existing risk management file until that update is released. The correct answer is B. Immediately update the risk management file to include the identified user interface failure mode, reevaluate the associated risks, and implement appropriate risk control measures, documenting all changes and their verification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs where post-market surveillance data reveals a potential safety issue that was not fully anticipated or mitigated during the initial risk management process. The challenge lies in balancing the need for timely and effective risk control with the practicalities of updating complex documentation like the risk management file, ensuring compliance with the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, and maintaining the integrity of the risk management process as defined by ISO 14971. The pressure to act quickly while adhering to rigorous documentation standards requires careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic review and update of the risk management file, specifically addressing the new information from stakeholder feedback. This aligns directly with Article 83 of the MDR 2017/745, which mandates that manufacturers shall establish, document, implement, maintain, keep up to date, and continually improve a quality management system, including processes for risk management. Furthermore, ISO 14971, 2019, as referenced by the MDR, requires that risk management activities be conducted throughout the entire life cycle of the medical device. Therefore, when new information arises that could affect the risk assessment or control measures, the risk management file must be updated to reflect these changes, including re-evaluating the risk analysis, risk evaluation, and risk control measures. This ensures that the residual risks are acceptable and that the device continues to be safe and perform as intended. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the feedback without a thorough investigation, arguing that the device has been on the market without significant issues. This fails to acknowledge the MDR's emphasis on continuous risk assessment and the proactive nature of risk management. It also ignores the ethical responsibility to address potential patient harm, even if it's based on emerging data. Such an approach could lead to a failure to identify and mitigate emerging risks, potentially resulting in patient harm and noncompliance with Article 83 of the MDR. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a corrective action without updating the risk management file. While implementing a fix is necessary, failing to document the rationale, the updated risk assessment, and the verification of the effectiveness of the new control measure within the risk management file is a direct violation of ISO 14971 requirements and the MDR's stipulations for a comprehensive risk management process. This creates a disconnect between the implemented actions and the documented risk assessment, undermining the integrity of the entire risk management system. A third incorrect approach might be to create a separate, informal document to record the feedback and propose changes, without integrating it into the formal risk management file. This bypasses the established procedures for risk management documentation and review, making it difficult to demonstrate compliance during an audit, and potentially leading to inconsistencies in the device's risk profile. The MDR requires a structured and documented approach to risk management, and informal record-keeping does not meet these requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, evidence-based approach. First, thoroughly investigate the stakeholder feedback to understand its nature and potential impact on device safety and performance. Second, initiate a formal review of the relevant sections of the risk management file, including the risk analysis, risk evaluation, and risk control measures. Third, if the feedback indicates a previously unaddressed hazard or an underestimated risk, update the risk management file accordingly, documenting all changes, justifications, and revised risk assessments. Fourth, implement necessary risk control measures and verify their effectiveness. Finally, ensure all updates are properly documented, reviewed, and approved according to the manufacturer's quality management system procedures, maintaining traceability and compliance with MDR 2017/745 and ISO 14971. Question 17. Implementation of a new active device designed for the long-term, surgically invasive administration of a potent medicinal product directly into the bloodstream, with the potential for systemic effects, requires careful consideration of its risk classification under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745, which approach best aligns with the MDR's risk-based classification framework for this device. Option A. Classify the device as Class Roman III, as it is surgically invasive, intended for long-term use, and involves the administration of a medicinal product with potential systemic effects, necessitating the highest level of scrutiny. Option B. Classify the device based solely on its novelty, without a detailed application of Annex Roman 8 rules, to allow for market entry while further assessment is conducted. Option C. Classify the device as Class I, given its primary function is drug delivery, and the novelty of the device suggests a need for a less burdensome classification initially. Option D. Classify the device as Class IA, as it is an active device and the drug administration aspect can be managed with moderate risk controls. The correct answer is A. Classify the device as Class Roman III, as it is surgically invasive, intended for long-term use, and involves the administration of a medicinal product with potential systemic effects, necessitating the highest level of scrutiny. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory affairs, determining the correct risk classification for a novel medical device. The challenge lies in the nuanced interpretation of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745, particularly Annex Roman 8, which outlines classification rules. Manufacturers must accurately assess the device's intended purpose, its invasiveness, its duration of use, and whether it acts locally or systemically. Misclassification can lead to significant consequences, including inadequate conformity assessment procedures, potential patient harm, and non-compliance with regulatory requirements, impacting market access and legal standing. The absence of direct precedent for a novel device necessitates a thorough and justifiable application of the existing rules. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a meticulous review of Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745, specifically focusing on Rule 10, which addresses active devices intended to administer or remove a medicinal product. This rule is applicable because the device's primary function is to deliver a drug. The device's classification as Class Roman III is justified if it meets the criteria for this class, which typically involves high risk, such as devices that are surgically invasive and intended for long-term use, or devices that are implantable and life-sustaining. The critical factor is the device's potential impact on patient health and safety, and the level of scrutiny required to ensure this. A Class Roman III classification mandates the most stringent conformity assessment procedures, including a full quality management system and a notified body's review of the technical documentation and quality system. This rigorous approach ensures the highest level of safety and performance for devices with the greatest potential risk. Incorrect approach is analysis. Classifying the device as Class I would be incorrect because Class I devices are generally considered low risk and have the least stringent conformity assessment procedures. This approach fails to acknowledge the inherent risks associated with administering a medicinal product, especially if the device has features that could lead to systemic effects or if it is intended for long-term use. It bypasses the necessary oversight for a device that directly interacts with the body to deliver a therapeutic agent. Classifying the device as Class IA or IB would also be incorrect if the device's characteristics, as described, push it beyond the scope of these intermediate risk classes. For instance, if the device is surgically invasive and intended for long-term use, or if it has the potential for significant systemic effects. It would likely exceed the criteria for Class IA or IB. These classifications would not provide the necessary level of assurance for a device that carries a higher risk profile than typically associated with these classes. Classifying the device solely based on its novelty without a thorough application of the MDR rules would be a significant regulatory failure. Novelty does not automatically dictate a classification. Rather, it necessitates a more careful and detailed application of the existing classification rules to determine the appropriate risk class. Overlooking the specific criteria in Annex Roman 8 due to the device's novelty would lead to an incorrect and potentially unsafe classification. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the device's intended purpose and all its functionalities. 2. Carefully reviewing Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745, identifying all potentially applicable rules. 3. Analyzing the device against each relevant rule, considering its invasiveness, duration of use, action local/systemic, and whether it is active or non-active. 4. Documenting the rationale for the chosen classification, referencing specific sections of the MDR. 5. Seeking expert opinion or consultation if there is ambiguity or if the device presents unique challenges. 6. Being prepared to justify the classification to regulatory authorities and notified bodies. The decision-making process should prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else, ensuring that the chosen classification accurately reflects the device's risk profile and triggers the appropriate conformity assessment procedures. Question 18. Market research demonstrates a growing demand for a novel medical device that combines advanced 3D imaging capabilities for precise anatomical visualization with an integrated system for delivering a targeted therapeutic agent directly to specific tissue sites. The device also incorporates sophisticated software that analyzes the imaging data to guide the delivery mechanism and monitor physiological responses in real time. The intended use is to treat localized, non-life-threatening conditions, but the therapeutic agent, if misapplied or delivered incorrectly, could lead to significant tissue damage. The device is intended for use by trained medical professionals in a hospital setting and is designed for single patient use during a procedure. Considering the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745, which classification is most appropriate for this device? Option A, Class Roman 3, Option B, Class IB, Option C, Class IA, Option D, Class I. The correct answer is A, Class Roman 3. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs, determining the correct classification for a novel device with multiple intended uses and functionalities. The challenge lies in the inherent complexity of the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745, particularly Annex Roman 8, which outlines classification rules. The device's combination of diagnostic and therapeutic elements, coupled with its software component, necessitates a thorough understanding of how to apply these rules, especially when different functionalities might point to different classifications. A misclassification can have significant consequences, including non-compliance, delayed market access, and potential patient harm. Careful judgment is required to ensure the highest risk classification is applied when multiple rules are applicable, as mandated by the MDR. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic application of the classification rules in Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745. Specifically, Rule 11, Software, and Rule 1, Invasive Devices, and Rule 6, Active Devices, would need to be considered. Rule 11 states that software intended to provide information for diagnostic or therapeutic purposes is classified according to the risk class of the medical devices with which it is intended to be used. However, if the software is intended to control a medical device that can cause death or irreversible damage to the patient, it is classified as Class Roman 3. Rule 1 states that surgically invasive devices intended for temporary use are Class IA, and for long-term use are Class IB. Rule 6 states that active therapeutic devices intended to administer or remove a medicinal product from the body, which could be dangerous due to the nature of their energy, dose, or effect on the patient, are Class Roman 3. Given the device's ability to deliver a therapeutic agent and its potential to cause significant physiological changes, the highest applicable risk class must be chosen. The combination of diagnostic imaging, therapeutic agent delivery, and the potential for significant physiological impact strongly suggests a higher classification. The most prudent and compliant approach is to classify the device based on the highest risk associated with any of its intended uses or functionalities, as per the MDR's principle of erring on the side of caution for patient safety. This ensures that the device undergoes the most stringent conformity assessment procedure, thereby maximizing patient safety and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that classifies the device solely based on its diagnostic imaging component would be incorrect because it ignores the significant therapeutic function and its associated risks. This failure to consider all intended uses and functionalities violates the MDR's principle of classifying based on the highest risk. Similarly, classifying the device based only on its software's informational role, without considering its interaction with the therapeutic delivery system, is a critical error. Rule 11 explicitly links software classification to the risk of the device it controls or the information it provides, focusing only on the temporary use aspect of the invasive component, while neglecting the potential for irreversible damage from the therapeutic agent delivery, is also a misapplication of the rules. The selective application of classification rules leads to underclassification, bypassing necessary conformity assessment procedures, and ultimately jeopardizing patient safety. Ethically, this represents a failure to uphold the primary responsibility of ensuring device safety and efficacy. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such a scenario should adopt a structured, rule-based approach. First, thoroughly understand all intended uses and functionalities of the device. Second, meticulously review Annex Roman 8 of the MDR 2017/745, identifying all potentially applicable classification rules for each function. Third, apply the principle of selecting the highest risk class when multiple rules apply. Fourth, consult with subject matter experts, including clinical specialists and other regulatory professionals, if there is any ambiguity. Finally, document the entire classification process, including the rationale for selecting specific rules and the justification for the final classification, to ensure transparency and auditability. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal a potential underestimation of a specific risk associated with a Class EIB medical device's software component, which was previously assessed under Annex Roman 2, Full Quality Assurance System, and Annex Roman 9, Conformity Assessment based on a Quality Management System and Assessment of Technical Documentation. The manufacturer needs to determine the most appropriate regulatory action concerning the conformity assessment procedure. Option A. Revert to a less stringent conformity assessment procedure, such as Annex Roman 3, Production Quality Assurance, based on the perceived reduction in risk after implementing corrective actions. Option B. Proceed with implementing corrective actions for the software risk without informing the notified body, assuming the existing conformity assessment procedure is still valid. Option C. Conduct an internal review of the risk management file, and if deemed satisfactory, continue with the current conformity assessment procedure without further external consultation. Option D. Engage with the notified body to discuss the findings and determine if the existing conformity assessment procedure remains adequate or if a modification or reassessment is required based on the revised risk assessment. The correct answer is D. Engage with the notified body to discuss the findings and determine if the existing conformity assessment procedure remains adequate or if a modification or reassessment is required based on the revised risk assessment. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in medical device regulatory affairs, a discrepancy identified during quality control that could impact the device's conformity with the Medical Device Regulation, MDR 2017/745. The core of the challenge lies in determining the appropriate conformity assessment procedure to follow when such a deviation is discovered post-market, especially when it relates to a critical aspect like risk management. The manufacturer must balance the need for continued market access with the imperative to ensure patient safety and device efficacy, all within the strict confines of the MDR. The correct approach involves a thorough reevaluation of the risk management process and its impact on the device's overall conformity. This necessitates engaging with the relevant notified body, as stipulated by the MDR, to ensure that any changes or identified nonconformities are properly assessed, and that the chosen conformity assessment procedure remains appropriate. This proactive engagement with the notified body is crucial for maintaining regulatory compliance and demonstrating due diligence in ensuring the device's safety and performance. It aligns with the MDR's emphasis on a life cycle approach to device safety and the manufacturer's ongoing responsibility. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the existing conformity assessment procedure remains valid without further scrutiny or consultation. This fails to acknowledge the potential impact of the quality control findings on the device's risk profile and its continued compliance with essential safety and performance requirements. Ethically, it represents a failure to prioritize patient safety and a disregard for the manufacturer's post-market obligations. Regulatory failures would include a breach of the MDR's requirements for ongoing vigilance, risk management, and notification of significant changes or incidents to the notified body. Another incorrect approach would be to implement corrective actions without assessing their impact on the conformity assessment and without informing the notified body. This bypasses the established regulatory pathways for ensuring that modifications do not compromise the device's safety or performance, and could lead to the device being placed on the market without proper oversight. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a systematic review of the identified issue, an assessment of its potential impact on the device's risk profile and essential requirements, and a clear understanding of the manufacturer's obligations under the MDR. This includes consulting the relevant annexes of the MDR pertaining to conformity assessment procedures and risk management. Crucially, it involves open and transparent communication with the notified body to determine the most appropriate course of action, which may involve reassessment or modification of the conformity assessment procedure. Question 20. Governance review demonstrates that a medical device manufacturer has developed a robust system for collecting and analyzing post-market surveillance data. However, the internal audit also highlights that the clinical evaluation report, CER, for a previously CE-marked device has not been updated in 3 years, despite the availability of new scientific literature and incident reports related to the device's performance. Which of the following approaches best reflects the manufacturer's ongoing obligations under the Medical Device Regulation, MDR, 2017/745, regarding clinical evaluation? Option A. The manufacturer should await further guidance from regulatory authorities before undertaking any revisions to the clinical evaluation report, as the 3-year interval is a generally accepted period for review. Option B. The manufacturer must immediately initiate a comprehensive review of all available post-market surveillance data, scientific literature, and incident reports to update the clinical evaluation report, ensuring it reflects the current state of the art and the device's real-world performance and safety. Option C. The manufacturer should focus on updating the technical documentation to reflect any new findings, as the clinical evaluation report is primarily a pre-market assessment tool. Option D. The clinical evaluation report is considered complete upon initial CE marking, and updates are only required if a significant design change is implemented or if mandated by a specific regulatory authority. The correct answer is B. The manufacturer must immediately initiate a comprehensive review of all available post-market surveillance data, scientific literature, and incident reports to update the clinical evaluation report, ensuring it reflects the current state of the art and the device's real-world performance and safety. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in regulatory affairs where the interpretation and application of a fundamental concept like clinical evaluation can be subjective. The challenge lies in ensuring that the clinical evaluation is not merely a documentation exercise, but a robust, ongoing process that genuinely supports the safety and performance claims of a medical device throughout its life cycle. As mandated by the MDR, the pressure to bring devices to market efficiently can sometimes lead to a temptation to streamline or shortcut this critical process, making rigorous adherence to the MDR's intent paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes the continuous and iterative nature of clinical evaluation, directly aligning with Article 56 of the MDR and Annex Roman 14. It recognizes that clinical evaluation is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process that must be updated with new data. This approach ensures that the manufacturer actively monitors the device's real-world performance and safety, updating the clinical evaluation report, as necessary. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining the device's conformity and ensuring patient safety, reflecting best professional practice by prioritizing evidence-based decision-making and regulatory compliance throughout the device's lifecycle. Incorrect approaches analysis, an approach that solely relies on pre-market clinical investigation data without considering post-market surveillance, PMS, data fails to meet the MDR's requirement for an ongoing process. This is a regulatory failure because Article 56 explicitly mandates the use of PMS data to update the CER. Ethically, it risks patient safety by potentially overlooking emerging risks or performance issues identified after the device is in use. An approach that treats the CER as a static document, completed only at the time of initial CE marking, is a significant regulatory failure. The MDR requires the CER to be a living document, updated periodically, and whenever new relevant information becomes available. This static approach ignores the dynamic nature of medical device performance and safety in real-world use, leading to a potential breach of the manufacturer's ongoing obligations. An approach that focuses exclusively on the technical documentation and ignores the clinical relevance of the data presented is a regulatory and ethical failure. While technical documentation is essential, the clinical evaluation's purpose is to interpret this data in the context of patient safety and performance. Omitting this critical interpretation means the device's clinical benefit-risk profile is not adequately assessed, potentially leading to the marketing of devices with unmanaged risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a life-cycle approach to clinical evaluation. This involves establishing clear procedures for data collection, analysis, and interpretation from pre-market investigations and post-market surveillance. Regular reviews of PMS data, scientific literature, and any reported incidents should trigger updates to the CER. This systematic process ensures that the clinical evaluation remains current, robust, and fully compliant with the MDR, thereby safeguarding patient well-being and maintaining market access.